half fish. Can a mermaid eat a fish?
When I was 9, I used to swim in my pool with my legs tied together, which actually is not very safe, and sing every single song from The Little Mermaid. First cartoon I ever learnt all of the words to all of the songs, as well as the movie too. Today's mermaid cake is inspired by the beautiful Ariel and one of my all-time favorite Disney movies. When I first started my YouTube channel, my niece Charlie was 5 years old and she started a YouTube channel too. If you guys want to go and check out Charlie's Crafty Kitchen, they're now 11 and 9. They're going to show you guys how to make amazing, super cute mermaid tail cupcakes to perfectly complement the mermaid tail cake.
These look pretty tasty. There's the candy! Woo! Yeah! Hey Ash, do you want to be a unicorn?
Yep.
I'm going to leave a link to their video down below, or you can click to watch the video, but make sure you check it out and hit them up with a like. They're pretty awesome kids and they're kind of amazing little bakers. All right, the things you're going to need to make your way over the top mermaid tail cake. I've got a double batch of my buttercream frosting. I'll leave a link to that recipe down below if you don't have a good frosting recipe, but I don't recommend store-bought frosting for this cake. I've colored mine in 4 different mermaidy type colors. So I went with a lighter blue and a darker blue and a purple and a green. But I also left about a half a cup of frosting uncolored because I need just a little bit of white for this cake. I've got 3 6-inch chocolate mud cakes. So this is just under a double batch of the mud cake recipe from the Sweet Celebrations cookbook. Otherwise, it's also up here on my YouTube channel. Again, I will leave a link to that recipe down below. You're gonna have enough to do 3 of these 6-inch mud cakes and about a dozen or so cupcakes. 1 you'll need for the cake and the rest you'll need to make the cupcakes from the Charlie's Crafty Kitchen channel. So we've got you covered. You guys have the option here. So I've got some round piping tips. If you have 4 of these, definitely go ahead, and it doesn't matter what size, but I'm actually gonna make this cake without them so you can know how to do it either way. I've also made you guys a mermaid tail template, so you're gonna need 2 copies of those, some scissors, a bamboo skewer, and a little glue. First up, you wanna start with nice chilled cakes. So once they're baked and you've let them cool on the bench, pop them off into either the fridge or the freezer for about an hour, so you're working with quite a cool chilled cake. Trust me, it'll carve a lot easier for you. I'm gonna use a serrated edge knife and I'm just gonna trim off the very top of my cake so I kind of make it flat on top, but don't discard that top layer at the moment. And then you can either use a cake leveler here or just go by eye. I'm gonna divide my cake in half. I'm gonna repeat that for all 3 of my cakes so that I have 6 layers that are 6 inches round and about 1 inch or so high. And I'm not discarding any of those tops because you kind of need to add those on just to round out the very top of your mermaid tail, plus 1 cupcake. I'm building my cake on a cake board, but you can also use a plate or something here. And I'm gonna start by just putting down a little schmear of buttercream frosting. That's just gonna stick our cake in place. So pop your first layer of cake down and then a really nice thin crumb coat. This just picks up any of those chocolatey crumbs so that you can add a nicer coat of frosting on top. So when you cut the cake, it's a little cleaner to look at in the middle and you don't have crumbs in these pretty colors of frosting. Stack up all of the rest of your cakes, repeating that process, and I chose to put different colors of mermaidy colored frosting in between each of my layers. That's gonna make sure that I have about an even amount of frosting left over to actually ice the outside of the cake, but it also just looks cute when you cut it. When you get to the top, you wanna add a little more frosting to stick your little cake scraps, I guess, on top, and then take your cupcake out of its cupcake liner, a little frosting on top, and pop it upside down. Your cake should look like a weird tall cone. Pop that off into the fridge for about 15 minutes or so just to let your buttercream start to set. As always with these cakes, the cooler they are, the easier they are for you to carve and frost, especially because we didn't use any center support in the middle of this cake. Normally I would on a 6-layer cake, but because I'm using mud cake, which I know is firmer and more stable, and because my cake tapers at the top so much, I'm confident that I don't need it. If you're transporting this a long distance, you might want to check out maybe my Tinkerbell cake, where I've actually showed you guys how to stack and support cakes before using straws and a little center board. I don't think we need it for this one. Using a serrated knife, because it's easier to carve, I'm just gonna cut away any like kind of sharpish edges. So the base of the cupcake and then kind of the top edges of that last cake layer, but don't go too crazy here. You want it to be kind of a cone shape, but the frosting technique that we're gonna use leaves a lot of room for error. I'm gonna crumb coat my cake. So using an offset spatula, I'm just gonna press a really thin layer of frosting almost into the cake. So back and forward, picking up any of those crumbs and encasing my cake in delicious frosting. I'm using my teal frosting here. You could also use your purple, but don't use either of your blues because you're gonna need those to make a little bit of a water effect. Put your crumb coated cake into the fridge for about 15 minutes because cold cake is always a little bit easier to work on. And while you're doing that, you can fill all of your piping bags. I've got 4 disposable piping bags, and like I said, you can use a round piping tip, but because I know that a lot of you guys aren't gonna have 4 round piping tips all in the same size, you can actually do this without a piping tip. I'm gonna cut the end off my first piping bag, and then I'm gonna use that end as a bit of a template so that I cut the exact same amount off each of my 4 piping bags. You don't wanna have different sized scales here, so doing this just makes sure that all of your piping bag openings are the same size. With frosting in all 4 of your piping bags and your cake semi-chilled, it's time to do this scale technique. You guys might have seen me do this technique on my Beauty and the Beast cupcakes video not so long ago, or you might have also seen it on my Sleeping Beauty cake. Basically, you're placing like a dot or a blob, it's the technical term, and then you want to drag through that dot to sort of create like a long tail on it. So essentially you squeeze the frosting onto the cake and then you drag the bag upwards. And you can see it gives you like this effect of almost like a little streak of frosting with a slightly fatter rounded bottom. That's gonna be our scale effect. I'm just gonna alternate between all of my colors. So some blue, some purple, some lighter blue, a little bit of that tealy color, and these don't have to be in any particular order. It actually looks better if they're a little random. If your frosting streak's about 1 inch long, you wanna start that next row about 1/2 inch from the bottom. I'm gonna keep piping that technique all the way around the outsides of my cake. You can go and just do all of your dark blue scales in a row and then all of your light blue scales, but I would suggest sticking row to row and making sure that you're keeping those rows pretty even. They don't have to be perfect, but you don't want your scales to be too far out of alignment. I actually used purple as my least dominant color because I think it ended up looking really nice just peeking through all of those greens, blues, and teals. When you get to the very top, you'll need less of those little petal frosting dots as you go. But when you get to the very, very top, you just want to neaten it up. So I'm just going to pipe some very small petals and I'm dragging that piping bag right into the middle so they almost make like a little pinwheel effect and overlap each other slightly. Bear in mind the width of the top of your mermaid tail template here. If you need to trim it, but you don't want that frosting at the top to be remarkably fatter than the mermaid tail itself. You kind of want it to flow nicely. Before I add the tail, I'm gonna show you guys a super simple technique for water. So I'm just gonna use my spatula to really just smear like patches of white buttercream frosting in no particular order. And then because they're already in piping bags, I'm gonna pop on some long streaks of my lighter blue frosting and then just some haphazard kind of streaks of my darker blue frosting. Again, with the offset spatula, I'm just gonna kind of work it back and forward, and you wanna make sure that you're getting like that nice sort of ripply, wavy effect. This is also a great spot if you've got any spaces at the bottom of your cake that you wanna cover up. Add a little water to the side of that thing, like it's splashing up the side of the mermaid tail. It can cover any number of sins. So you wanna take this guy and stick it straight down. It's beautiful. This is an awesome cake to make because it's actually really simple, and because we've skirted around using fondant for the tail, it really is a fuss-free option if you guys are looking for a really cool Little Mermaid inspired cake. Does anyone else feel like sushi? I feel like sushi.
I wonder if I like this cake because I like sushi and fish fingers. Wow! Mermaids taste delicious. Mermaids taste delicious. Although, maybe the chocolate ones.